Foreign Minister ظريف, pleasure to have you on again.
Good to be back.
You know, a lot of people think that the Iranian government is trying to raise tensions in the Persian Gulf by interdicting tankers, by, in a sense, signaling that it could, in various ways, block the flow of oil from the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, you see, we are in the Persian Gulf. We have 1,500 miles of coastline with the Persian Gulf. I mean, we control the Strait of Hormuz. It is, I mean, these waters are our lifeline. So their security is of paramount importance for Iran. But throughout history, Iran has provided security in these waters. The United States is intervening in order to make these waters insecure for Iran. You cannot make these waters insecure for one country and secure for others.
Do you believe that as a result of this, whoever is to blame, you could have an escalation which would result in a military incident?
Well, in such a small body of water, if you have so many foreign vessels, I mean, accidents will happen. You remember 1988, when a U.S. warship in these waters shot down an Iranian civil airliner, killing 290 passengers. So accidents, even catastrophes, can happen under these circumstances.
Do you think that with tensions being as high as they are, there is a possibility of war?
Well, you cannot simply disregard a possibility of a disaster, but we all need to work in order to avoid one. There is a war going on right now. It's an economic war. An economic war against Iran targets civilian population. And President Trump is on the record saying that he is not engaged in military war, but in an economic war. Economic war is nothing to be proud of, because in a military confrontation, civilians may become collateral damage, whereas in an economic war, civilians are the primary targets.
Were you surprised by the ability of the United States, of the Trump administration, to essentially stop you from engaging in any international economic activity, from even selling your oil on international markets, this one country?
Well, it is regrettable, not just for Iran, but for the international community, that the United States can, in fact, bully important players in international markets to obey its rules against both international law and against their own interests. It is certainly regrettable. We will continue to sell our oil. You will find...
But your production is way down.
It is way down, but we will find ways to mend the situation. As you have seen, our currency market has stabilized now after a year of fluctuation, and it's going, I mean, it's improving. It means that we will continue to face these difficulties with pride and with prudence.
There are a lot of people who believe that the noose is around your neck, that the United States has got you in a situation, the economy has declined, the IMF has shrunk by 5 or 6%, the currency did go down almost 50 or 60%. Are you cornered?
No. I think the United States has found it necessary, because of its own mistakes, to put excessive emphasis on its economic might, to weaponize the US dollar. And as any analyst would tell you, in the medium and long term, this is bound to have a negative impact on the predominance of US dollar in the global economy. You see now that many countries, including US allies, are moving away from dollar, using their own national currencies. Last year, Iran and Turkey used their national currencies in 35% of their trade. Others are doing the same. China and Russia decided to put aside dollar in their bilateral endeavors. You now have a non-dollar denomination oil market in Shanghai. These are realities of the day because of the excessive use and the weaponization of dollars. So at the end of the day, because of U.S. desperation, of this obsession with Iran that they want to destroy somebody else's legacy and put aside this nuclear deal that was negotiated, they're overusing their dollar strength, and at the end of the day, it would cost them.
Do you think that you will be able to sell oil to China and India in the next few months?
We will continue to sell oil. To who and how is going to be a state secret, because otherwise U.S. will go and prevent us from doing that. But we will continue to sell oil. The international oil markets cannot survive without our oil.
Secretary Pompeo has restricted tightly your movement and actually the movement of Iranian embassy staff even. He says he doesn't want to give a platform to you to spew Iranian propaganda. Why should he not get a chance to speak on Iranian TV? Will you here say that Secretary of State Pompeo can go on Iranian TV?
First of all, I'm grateful to you for coming to our residence to do the interview instead of me coming to your studio. That's a burden on you and not on me. I'm very happy to be here with you. I think the restrictions that have been put on our staff, not on me. I come here for a few days. 3 buildings is usually what I stay in. Here, our mission and the United Nations. I don't have any other business here in New York. I don't come here for sightseeing. I've done enough sightseeing during my student days here in the United States, so I don't need to do sightseeing. But the restrictions that they have put on staff of our mission are inhuman. Their children cannot go to school. These are unacceptable. They are limited to an undiplomatic neighborhood for residents. Yes, this is unheard of. These are against the headquarters agreement. The United States agreed to have the honor of hosting the UN headquarters. It comes with some commitments, with some obligations. But as far as Secretary Pompeo's appearance on Iranian television is concerned, he has been rejecting requests for interviews by Iranian journalists. And I'm sure he will find enough requests from him, from Iranian TV, from other Iranian media, and if he decides to accept them on the same terms that I accept appearing on American media, I'm sure he'll get a chance.
Foreign Minister ظريف, Donald Trump says he doesn't want war with Iran. He also says, most recently, he does not want regime change. Do you believe him?
I think he doesn't want war with Iran. I think he doesn't care about who rules Iran. He doesn't want regime change. But that's not what the people around him are interested in. And I think it is important for President Trump to look at the people around him. We take him at his word that he doesn't want war, he doesn't want regime change. But I can assure him that there are a few people around him who are on the record saying that they want war and regime change.
I've been told that President Trump sent a letter to the supreme leader of Iran in which he essentially offered to restart negotiations.
Well, President Trump did not send a letter, but Prime Minister Abe brought his message, verbal message, and the supreme leader listened very carefully. The problem is we cannot start negotiating with every new American administration. Any country will deal with another country based on the fact that governments represent their countries. We just had an election here in the United States. We didn't have a revolution. You didn't have a revolution here in the US. President Trump succeeded President Obama. Administrations have executive agreements, they have treaties, but they have all sorts of agreements that continue to be binding on the country. You cannot simply say, I don't like the previous administration and I want to renegotiate everything they did. That may be an internal issue for you, but for us, we spent several years, hours, days, weeks, months, nights. One of the negotiating sessions that we had with Secretary Kerry started at 9 o'clock in the evening and ended without a pause at 6 the following morning. This is not something to renegotiate. Now, if President Trump says that this was not a treaty, this was just an executive agreement, these are domestic issues. But he has violated enough treaties. Remember INF? Remember NAFTA? Remember UNESCO? Remember many other.
But let me propose a win-win. You said that there has to be a win-win for so he has to win something too. And the win would be that you agree to go back to the negotiating table. There's a suspension of these sanctions. The U.S. suspends while you talk. But you agree to talk about the nuclear deal, ballistic missiles, and Iran's regional activities.
Well, first of all, we did not leave the negotiating table. We are at the negotiating table. The United States left the negotiating table. So if they put sanctions aside, they can come back to the negotiating table and they can start discussing with us. At the negotiating table, we have always discussed the nuclear issue, how to implement the agreement that we have. So they're more than welcome to do that. On missiles and regional issues, we have not seen the seriousness of the United States in implementing what they already agreed to. We have to see the seriousness of the United States. We are not going to negotiate about our defense. It's a historical, emotional attachment for our people. Our people went through 8 years of war when they were being targeted, when they were being showered with missiles and bombs and even chemical weapons. And nobody gave us the minimum means of defense. Everybody from the then Soviets who gave the Iraqis MiG airplanes, to the Americans who gave them AWACS reconnaissance, to the French who gave them Exocet missiles, to the Brits who gave them Chieftain tanks, to the Germans who gave them chemical weapons. Everybody helped them. Nobody even allowed us to buy a single missile to defend ourselves. So it's impossible to tell the Iranian people that while the United States is selling $87 billion worth of military equipment, while Saudi Arabia is buying $87 billion worth of military equipment, and the United States is selling over $50 billion worth of military equipment to our region, to the Persian Gulf every year, that they expect us to abandon our only and most important means of defense.
So let me ask you, we don't have much time. What is the win for President Trump? You say there has to, the only way that you're going to get out of this is a win-win, not a lose-lose. How do you give President Trump a win?
Well, President Trump can, in fact, find a mechanism to have international peace and security through agreement, through understanding, rather than through confrontation. He made a very prudent decision not to start a war by deciding not to attack Iran in retaliation, because he knew that we would have responded, and then, as I said, you can start a war, but you cannot end it. So that was a very prudent decision, and he can take credit for it. He can take credit for restoring a good treaty that made both Iran and the United States and the rest of the world safer. He can also take credit for the fact that he has been able to make sure that international agreements are abided by. So these are all important wins for President Trump and for the United States. And I'm sure this is going to be a very important legacy for him.
But that sounds like there's going to be a long Cold War right now.
Well, we have been under pressure from the United States for 40 years. And that's not new for us. We've learned to safeguard our interests, to safeguard our people, in spite of that. But the United States, you see, prevented us from getting means of defense. We built them ourselves. They prevented us from getting fuel for a US-built nuclear reactor. We produced the fuel ourselves. They prevent us from making the money that is needed by selling our oil in order to feed our population, to buy medicine for our population. We'll find ways of circumventing it. They should not come and complain afterwards. I think these are not our preferences. The people of Iran prefer to have engagement. But if the United States wants to prevent us from engagement, we will not simply accept to either submit to the will of a foreign power or to simply allow our people to suffer. We will find ways around it, and the United States should accept the consequences.